Today on Let Me Be Frank, we are joined by world-renowned art historian Elizabeth Lev. And Liz is going to join us from Italy to talk about beauty and art and the difference between being a tourist and being a pilgrim, and why is art important. And Bishop asks her, what would you like to tell bishops to do to promote beauty and the understanding of beauty? This is a great conversation, so keep your radio here at 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, or keep listening on your phone. If you are enjoying Let Me Be Frank by podcast, please make sure you rate us, review us, give us 5 stars so we can reach more souls. And Let Me Be Frank is brought to you by a grant from Foundations in Faith. Foundations in Faith embraces innovative approaches to funding pastoral care programs in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and resources focus on energizing lifelong faith formation and discipleship and fostering a commitment to justice and accompaniment with our most vulnerable. From seminarians to retired priests, from baptism to last rites, from suburbs to inner cities, the reach is broad and the impact is meaningful. For more information, visit them on the web at foundationsinfaith.org. Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Steve, good morning. Good morning.
Hey, Excellency.
We're plowing our way through summer, my friend. Before you know it,
Yep.
we will be back in the saddle.
My son leaves in 2 weeks from today, from our recording, to go to college.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, school opens the last week of August, so
Yeah.
I'm done with summer. Actually, it's time to get back to the fall. Really, it's all this hanging around. No, it's not my style.
You have millions of parents agreeing with you, I think, right now.
Oh yeah, but there are so many votive candles lit. Are you kidding? Absolutely. Well, today we have a great guest because we're going to talk about a subject which is very dear to my heart, which is beauty and art. Right?
Yes.
Which I think has been our swan song here for a couple of years now.
Yes.
So anyway,
Yeah.
why don't you do our introductions, my friend?
And I'm excited because our guest I've been listening to on various media for years, and she is just the best. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Lev. Liz Lev is a transplanted U.S. art historian with degrees from the University of Chicago and the University of Bologna. Liz has been able to take her love of Rome, its people, the food, the art, the history, and make it a vocation, working as a guide in Rome for over 20 years and teaching at Duquesne University's Italian campus, as well as at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. She has served as a commissioner of the Tourism Board of Rome and a didactic consultant for the Vatican Museums. And Liz is the author of 4 books, and you've almost definitely heard her interviewed about art and the papacy on TV and radio and podcasts, as I have. And let's see, her 4 books, very quickly. The Tigress of Forli, Roman Pilgrimage, The Station Churches, The Silent Night, which is right here behind me on my bookcase, and How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, The Triumph of Beauty and Truth in Counter-Reformation Art. That's on my other bookcase. So, Liz Lev, thank you so much for joining us today on Let Me Be Frank.
Wow. Well, Steve, that is like the greatest introduction ever. Thank you. And I'm very excited to be here, Bishop Frank, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh gosh, I'm delighted. Now, I ask all my guests the same question. You're going to get the same question. And so to the extent that you're comfortable, tell us about your own journey of faith. Like, how did you wind up being transplanted in Rome, falling in love with all things Italian vis-a-vis art and beauty and tourism and all the rest? Tell us your journey a bit.
Well, the answer to all questions in this sphere is art. I discovered that I really loved art early on in life, which is really a blessing when you have a sense of what you feel called towards early on. Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful thing. How I was going to get there, I had no idea. I think when I said I was going to major in art history at University of Chicago, my parents responded by asking, is that will be pre-med art or pre-law art? But they were good sports. And eventually in studying art, I studied Italian because I was studying Renaissance art. And then from studying Italian, I came to Italy, and the world here was different. And I think in many ways, one of the things that really drew me to this place is that I liked who I was better here than in the US. I was a person who was more open to new ideas, who was more willing to look at things in a more sort of 360 kind of way. And I feel when I'm taken away from here, although I never stopped being proud to be an American and delighted for my American roots, I feel a little bit when I'm taken away from here that I'm out of. It's like I've been taken away from the battery charger, and I need to get back so that I can become that person who sees in this way that I'm fortunate enough to see.
So how long have you lived in Italy?
35 years, and this is me probably taking a year or two off just out of vanity.
Oh, wow. So basically the majority of your life has been in the Italian world.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So now I myself being Italian, this all resonates. You have no idea how this resonates in my heart. But it is a different world. Like just the way you described when I lived, I've told this story on the podcast. When I lived in Rome, it was culture shock, even though I was Italian American, how different aspects of life are. And when you go into the rural areas, like when my parents were born, even more so. But if I were to press you on this, I guess, and this is maybe an unfair question, so you could tell me to move on to the next one, but how would you describe at least one or two of the differences? Like what?
So I've been here for, let's say, 35 years. Every day I have culture shock. It's always something. Just this morning, I can tell you, I am in Puglia, so I'm out of the city and I'm in the more countryside regions. And I went with my husband to take care of something administrative this morning, only to find out that offices are not open on Wednesday mornings. I mean, just everybody else knows this except for, of course, me. So, but I think one of the things that is the croce edilizia, as they would say in La Traviata, is this intense breaking down of those sort of personal walls. So I'm from Boston, and I'm used to this kind of, my buffers have buffers. But in Italy, there's really none of that in the way that people speak to you, the way that people sort of encroach on what you would consider topics that are not discussable. It's a very interesting thing about this country. And that's very lovely because on one hand, people know you and they invite you into their culture. On the other hand, they do it at a speed where perhaps people from the city in the US are a little bit more, let's put our foot on the brake here.
Yeah, that would make sense. My experience has been that everything is much more, I use the phrase in the open. It's like emotions are on people's sleeves. You know what people are thinking, feeling, sharing, talking about, much more of a, like even my friends coming to my house was culture shock for them because the things we talked about at the dinner table when they came as guests, they would never have talked about at home in their dinner tables. It's just, it is a different way. But let me ask you this, in 35 years is a long time. In that sense, Italy itself has changed. I think
Yes.
Italy is changing. So do you see that changing too, what you just described? Is it growing? Is it the same? Is it lessening? Other things, other influences?
Yes, Italy has changed a great deal. Fortunately, its changes to me are more cosmetic and cosmetic for the good in many ways. There are negative aspects of it, but I think Italy has become a little bit more sort of catering to, since we really do depend on tourism, it's become a little bit more cosmopolitan than perhaps it once was. But in all honesty, I find that when push comes to shove, in this moment, I'm having sort of conversations with Americans about, for example, the Olympic ceremony, and I'm having conversations with Italians. And I just find that at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, the Italians have remained Italians. The changes that have happened. There's a lot of the cities, the countryside. Yes, it's different, but I have this great sense that Italians have remained true to themselves and not busy trying to become more like the French or more like the Americans or more like Germans or whatever the predominant culture might be. But that's my general take.
Well, that's hopeful then. That actually is very hopeful, because I was expecting perhaps not that answer. So to hear that answer is hopeful, because I think there's always the tendency for the American way of life to infiltrate in so many different cultures around the world, simply because of entertainment and media and social media and all the rest, that other cultures may suffer, right? But I'm glad to hear that. If I may, I'm going to make an observation, correct me, because all my guests correct me freely, right? My experiences of going to Rome over the last 15 years, particularly going to the holy sites in the city of Rome, is I've noticed that, this is generally speaking, that the demographic of those who are tourists is changing. And what I've noticed is, so this way I could be wrong, that there are a lot more individuals, for example, from Asia now coming to Rome, visiting the holy sites, coming to St. Peter's and all the rest, than I remember 10 or 15, certainly when I was there as a student priest. And is that true or not?
So, yes and no. I found that I would have agreed with you a little bit more in the pre-pandemic era, when there really was a sort of shocking number of Asian tourists. That I feel less dominant than I did before the pandemic. Now, this may be, the reason may be is that, depending on our government, which of course falls every 15 minutes, depending on the government, we have like a different attitude towards catering towards the Asian market. So there was a period when Italy was really very aggressively chasing after the Asian market. And then we began to realize, well, what if 1 billion people show up here? We're going to be hard pressed to handle that. And so I think that there's been a little bit of a pushing of the brake. I mean, I remember, so I was on the licensing board for tour guides in the early 2000s, and I remember there was just an absolute pass for Asian speaking guides. They really wanted lots and lots of Asian speaking guides. You don't have to know Italian. All the rules that applied for all the other people that were taking the guide license did not apply to them, because they were so desperate to get, because there's so few people there's so few like Italian Asian speakers. So they were really, really desperate to get that number up there. And so that I feel has changed a lot. So it depends a lot on the group. I would also say about the days that, I'm presuming you're younger than I am, Your Excellency, but back in the days when I first arrived here, we were hot on the heels of the Brigata Rossa. So I was at University of Bologna when the hole in the train station was still fresh. I remember the death of Falcone and Borsellino. I mean, I remember a country that was really struggling. We were in the midst of political strife. We were in the midst of tremendous struggles with the mafia. And so I look at Italy today that holds its head up high in the G7 and is actually leading in Europe. I'm very proud to be part of this country. And I am very proud that I threw my lot in with them all those years ago, even when it seemed like this place, my father used to call me and joke about, hey, did you have a government for 10 minutes today? This is exciting for you. But I am very proud of the strides that Italy has made. And I'm very, very proud of our present government that is very interested in maintaining our identity as a Catholic country, as a country of art, a country of peace, a country of love, a country of culture. So while we're having this conversation, I want to make sure that my voice is out there, that I love my native country, but my adopted country is my home.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. We don't get political, but I think the current prime minister has made an emphasis on everything you just said and family life in general. That for her, it's very important to foster family life. So she and Pope Francis have seemed to become natural allies. In fact, she invited, did she not, the Pope to the G7 meeting and the G20 meeting, whatever it was. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Which
That
is
was
20
really kind
miles
of
from where I'm
historic.
sitting right now.
Oh, is that
They
right?
came to
Oh, wow.
exactly where she vacations in our town where we have our where we
Right.
are Puglia, and it was great. They redid all the roads. Everything is fabulous. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
please have the G7 here more often.
You know what it is? The reason I asked the question about the Asians coming is for this reason. And again, because this is your expertise, it's one of the many things I would like to explore with you. There is a difference, I think, between being a tourist and being a pilgrim. And if you're a pilgrim, you're coming to the holy sites because of the faith and the encounter with Jesus Christ in this moment of beauty, which is really what a pilgrimage is, right? I think it's beauty in motion, right? You come to the place where Peter was martyred. You come to a church which is like St. Peter's, which I think is astonishingly beautiful. But just for the depth and breadth of the thing and how deceptive it is, since it's proportioned so perfectly, it's all that stuff, which you know better than I, obviously. And if you come, but you don't come with faith, you're still welcome to come, but it's a different experience. And I was worried that the pilgrimage part of it was diminishing and the tourist part was growing. But now I was worrying needlessly about that. But could you talk about that difference between tourism and pilgrimage?
That is an interesting perceptive. And if you were to ask me the one thing I want to talk about in this session, it would have been this. I've been working with the Dicastery of Communications on a podcast, which is called From Tourist to Pilgrim. And it is exactly confronting the problem or issue or reality that the overwhelming majority of people who come to Rome come as tourists. And the sites that they see, the Vatican, let's tick that off the list. St. Peter's will tick that off the list. We'll go see. I mean, even when they go see something like the Spanish Steps, they don't realize that the Spanish Steps were built for pilgrims, that the Trevi Fountain built for pilgrims. The whole outline layout of the city is built for pilgrims. And how much pilgrimage has really affected the urban planning, that which we consider Rome, is part of plans that have taken place over centuries on the part of the popes in order to create a place that is welcoming for pilgrims, which then got turned into a place that would be welcoming for tourists after the unification of Italy and the secularization and blah, 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 blah. So it's a really, really interesting question. Now, the reason why I was delighted when they invited me to be part of this is that it's what I consider my job to be. People come to me as tourists, or some of them come to me as pilgrims, which is lovely. And I love taking pilgrims around because we know what we're talking about. But every tourist is a potential pilgrim. Going back to the Grand Tour, the demographic began to change already in the 18th century, not with Asian tourists, but with the British, with the Swedish, with the pre-revolutionary French who had Voltaire and Rousseau in their back pockets. And they wanted to come to Italy, and they wanted to, in a certain sense, plunder its pleasures and destroy or diminish its religious meaning. And so we have been dealing with this in the city of Rome since the 18th century and the Enlightenment. And the church dealt with it magnificently for years and years and years. We found ways of, even without kind of hitting people over the head with a cudgel and the catechism, we found ways to kind of bring out deeper questions, because that's when people want to talk about faith, when they come someplace and they're away from their usual busyness that doesn't, permit them time to think. And many of us do this. You probably don't, Your Excellency, but I have been known to kind of pack my schedule so I don't have time to think about other things. And so they come to a place where the world is beautiful. They're surrounded by beauty. There's this great culture. There's a sit down, have a spritz. You don't have to be anywhere. Everything is calm. So I think there is that peacefulness, that otium, as we would say once upon a time in ancient Rome, allows people to start to ponder the bigger questions that are always present for all of us. And that is when we become a pilgrim, because we're looking for something. We are all looking for something.
You know, the image of a tourist as I think is what you said, I hope it's a potential pilgrim, is a great image, right? Because it's actually brilliant, because it shows how pilgrimage, even tourism, is a means of evangelization. It's a
Yes.
means of introducing people through beauty, of which pilgrimage is a manifestation of beauty, all right, to encounter Christ in very surprising and unexpected and unplanned ways, right?
I
So
agree completely.
I had never thought of it in those terms. So it's not really so much this versus that, but it's actually this as a possibility of joining that a tourist as a potential pilgrim is really kind of possibly would become a pilgrim, even though you come as a tourist. I like that image very much. I
So
like that very much.
everybody's favorite painting, The Calling of St. Matthew, in the
Hmm.
Church of San Luigi dei Francesi, which is in the heart of
Oh,
downtown Rome,
yes. Yep.
around the corner from the Piazza Navona. So tourists back and forth from the Pantheon to Piazza Navona, Trevi Fountain. Sort of thinking of something to do. I've just had a spritz. I've just had an ice cream. I probably should wait a couple more minutes before I have another one. What shall I do? Oh, look, there's an open door of a church. And so they wander into this church where all these people are kind of filing over to this one chapel over in the corner. And there is the image of a man painted by Caravaggio for the Jubilee year of 1600. It was specifically meant to be ready for a Jubilee year. And there is this St. Matthew crammed into a table with a lot of money on the table and people with their fancy clothes, and they've got everything that you could possibly seem to want, from your Negroni to your pizza. But that man, one of the men at the table, looks up, wondering if there's anything more. And that is the moment that there comes that light from the altar, from Christ, calling Matthew to conversion. That painting, I think, is the painting of conversion, of the moment we stop being a tourist in this life. We stop being someone's just, what's the next pleasure around the corner? And we get purpose as pilgrims. And I think that's
Right.
Caravaggio's greatest legacy to us all.
See, that's one example of how art teaches the faith. And it teaches the faith in a way that's different than a didactic lesson in a classroom, right? Catechism, which we'll talk about on the other side of our break. But the one thing I have to ask you is a personal question, all right? Because I have my own answer to it is, of the 7 days of the week, right? Morning, noon, and evening, do you have a favorite day and time to walk the streets of Rome?
Oh, Sunday morning.
Oh, good. See, we're kindred spirits. I agree. Now, why Sunday mornings? Maybe it's the same reasoning too.
Quiet. The only thing that are open are the churches. It becomes a city of prayer for that time in the morning, a little bit in the morning. It's the people who are out. You can be pretty much certain that everybody who is out, you're all going to the same place. You're all on your way to, there are
Right.
people go on their way to the early entrance to the Colosseum, but there's a real sense of purpose that is not your work in the sense of your work of this world, but there's a sense of purpose in your more important work of your spiritual life.
You know, Liz, I 1,000% agree. And the only thing I've come to, when I lived in Rome, because I lived for 5 years in Rome, when I would walk the streets on Sunday morning, because I lived at the Casa Santa Maria, right around the corner of the Fountain of Trevi, right? So
I know it
when I'd
well.
walk and to go right in all these different directions, the one thing that grew in my mind all those years when I would walk early, and I'm an early riser, so was absent the current population, whether it's the Romans, whether it's the tourists, the pilgrims, or who walked these streets through the centuries. Like you could almost image them in Roman garb, in medieval garb. I mean, some of those streets have been walked on for thousands of years. And in the communion of saints, those who are this are still with us. They are still walking with us.
I had a
And
friend who once described to me, and it always stays with me, the image of down that road, which is now, of course, Victor Emmanuel, St. Ignatius hustling down the road with a letter from Francis Xavier that he's on his way to go read to Philip Neri down at the end of the street. It always stays with me, that image.
And of course, since we don't tape on the same day that we actually unveil our video, so today is the feast of St. Ignatius Loyola. Today. So what a great story. It's, again, but that's what I mean. History is alive in Rome, in Italy. It's alive. It's not just dusted and put into a book and put on a shelf. And unfortunately, in the United States, we have not made it a priority always to reverence history and to learn from it. But the Italians is inescapable, right? It's just inescapable. Tremendous. We have to talk about art on the other side of our break. Art, and why is art such a big deal? I think.
Great.
As a preview.
I'll always talk about art.
Great. So this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. And His Excellency is speaking with Liz Lev, a 35-year resident of Italy and an expert in art history and all things Roman and Italian. And so there's more to come on the other side of the break, and we will be right back.
We care about you, your family, and your friends as you adjust to life after losing a loved one. The bereavement ministry of the Fairfield County Catholic Cemeteries of the Diocese of Bridgeport offers support and comfort at your own pace, whether you lost someone 2 years ago or 20 years ago. Our bereavement initiative includes the New Day program, which is parish-based and facilitator-led. This award-winning program offers the opportunity to share your story, listen to others, and provides a well-defined path to healing in a small group, faith-based setting. Additionally, in an effort to accompany those who have suffered the loss of a beloved child, we partner with the Emmaus Ministry for Grieving Parents and offer one-day spiritual retreats for parents who have lost a child of any age for any reason, no matter how long ago. Please check ctcemeteries.org/bereavement to learn more about how these programs might support you and those you love.
Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency is speaking with the very excellent Liz Lev, and I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Excellent. So Liz, all right. So we live in a utilitarian world, profits, bottom line, get to the point, text without even full words, whole thing. In that world, tell us, why is art important?
So it's a question that I have to face every semester, and every semester the question becomes more problematic as my students, again, in a very utilitarian world, it's a very bottom line approach to education. Why do I need to know this? Why is this important? I think art teaches you to look at things differently and carefully. And it is a very, very I find it very helpful because it keeps me from panicking or going off the edge, or because it teaches me about stopping to look at things. And so to begin with, art is about learning to look at things first, or maybe you first look at something passionately. I think you always do. You're attracted to a work of art. I'm attracted to Italian art or Baroque art because to me it's beautiful and exciting. But art teaches you to kind of stop and look a little bit more closely and try to understand how that is brought together, how an artist composes something to have an effect. And once you have that capacity, it helps you to be able to decipher a lot of what goes around about you today. The other thing about art that I think is, again, for me, and why I believe it's something that students should learn and people should be interested in, is that art is produced, no matter what you're looking at, it was produced in hard times. And we seem to think that we're living in the worst age that ever happened in the history of anything, which obviously precludes, the Great Plague of 1348, the World War I, World War II, and all the other things that have happened in the world. I mean, but we seem to sort of think that ugly and the brutal is just the way of life. But it's amazing how much beauty was produced during these very, very hard times.
Mm-hmm.
And art is a way of reminding us that human beings, we were meant for something greater, and we're able to partake in something greater by producing a beauty that reflects something greater. And so I find it constantly a way of art history is what I study. So you have to study history. It can be brutal, and it can be gritty, and it can be squalid, and it can be depressing. But then you study the art history, and you look at these people, and it humanizes them, and it makes you understand that these were people, some of these people doing bad things, some of these people trying to find something good. It makes me think of that line in Lord of the Rings, which if I were to have a tattoo, which I do not, it would probably be, Sam's line to Frodo, "There is some good in this world, Mr. Frodo,
Oh,
and
right.
it is
Yep.
worth fighting for." And art is a reminder of that.
The end of the second of the three films. Oh, yeah. I've watched those films many times. Oh, yeah. So is it fair to say that art is inspirational and aspirational? Is that fair?
Is inspirational? I mean, absolutely. Art is meant
Right.
to inspire. So art was meant to inspire. I think at the exact time, there's a lot of confusion about what art is supposed to do. It has a lot to do with the fact that the people who commission art, the great patrons of art, really don't want to respond to anything. So even if you look at the Greeks, I mean, we go back to the ancient Greeks and talk about pagan Greeks. So obviously they don't believe in the God that we believe in, but they believed in something higher. So they tried to create beauty. Then we have this incredible age of Christian art where they're really sort of constantly trying to evoke the divine. But the modern period we're in is sort of, they don't want to be constrained by anything, even what defines art. Like, what is a work of art? And the artist doesn't want to be constrained even by the definition of what a work of art is going to be. So it's created a lot of distrust towards art in our period. Therefore, art in this particular period has a lot more difficulty being inspirational. But you can look at the number of people who are walking into Sainte-Chapelle, which is one of my favorite sites on the planet, especially because nobody ever does any research about what they're going to go see when they go places. So you take them down, they stand in line, they come down to this lower part of a chapel, and it's all sort of blue and gold, and it's, a chapel. You're like, what is this about? You walk up a winding stair, and the stair is kind of long, so by the time they're thinking, boy, this better be worth it. And I always go first for the sheer joy of turning around and seeing people's faces when they see Sainte-Chapelle for the very first time. It's one of the greatest gratifications to watch them go, or every day walking into St. Peter's, exhausted after the Sistine Chapel, standing in line, walking through this long kind of ridiculous series of things to get into the Basilica. They walk through the threshold, and suddenly everything stops. And so you can see how beauty really can uplift, inspire, astonish, and change people. It can change people.
So if I may, see, thank you, because there's a whole bunch of things now going on in my mind. And the first is, you started to address a question that has always kind of perplexed me too. And that is, we spoke about Caravaggio, we speak about Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all these others, and all the great works of the flowering of Christian and Catholic art. And then we look at the modern world, like the Picassos of the world and the others. And I said to myself, how do we get from this to this? And of course, you tried to give, I think you gave the large overview of how we got to that. And so I guess, like, where do we go from here? Like, what is the next? And this is trying to forecast the future. I don't know what that really, I don't think anybody can do that. But like in the Middle Ages, the great patrons, of course, the church and the papacy was one of the greatest of the patrons of art, right, did put resources into art despite all of the difficulties. In the 21st century, the great philanthropists, I'm not sure, are investing in art. Maybe they are, but I'm not aware of it. They're investing in other things. And then art has changed. So, like, where do you think we go from here? Do you have any idea or any guess on your part? Are we going to go back? Will there be something else? It would be.
Yes, we're going in a not great direction. But if you, there are different places in Western art which have great flowerings, and I would argue that the bishops are the impetus behind the construction of the great cathedrals, leaders whose people are following them. It's a very kind of unique, interesting situation. I'm going to look at Renaissance Italy because that's a little closer to the society we live in today, where we have a lot of very successful merchants, people who have done very well for themselves, situations that are closer to the republics of Florence, of Venice, of Geneva, et cetera, et cetera. And there, not to take anything away from the papacy, which has been very, very, very important for the patronage of art, but the papacy tends to choose artists who have already proved themselves. Where we find the great activity on the ground takes place with the patrons, the Medicis, the Farneses, the Strozzis, the Tornabuonis, the Doges of Venice, the Corner family. So I would like to see a greater groundswell in this area. Waiting around for the Pope or the bishops or the cardinals to save art for you is a waste of time. No offense.
I agree.
But what the cardinals and the bishops did was they helped to create guidelines and to form the artists. I mean, they really helped to kind of create an environment in which the artists who would be working in sort of Christian milieu would know what to produce. But it was these great families that would be the ones that produce works of art for their homes. And so the argument I think needs to be made is that clearly, the world of art galleries does not care or respect your values, your religion, or your worldview. So buying works of art from those people, just because the names have become famous for reasons that nobody can tell you why, that doesn't make any sense. So for Christians, for Catholics to start to produce works of art that express their belief in beauty from contemporary artists, from people who are out there are a lot of skilled people out there. There are a lot of talented people. There are people with vision. There is a work of art that was recently commissioned by a priest got a hold of me. He wanted a work of art for a very, very particular situation. It was a very complicated situation, but he wanted to be able to give a gift to a family. And I gave him sort of the three people I thought were people who were able to be creative enough. And he began to work with this artist, and they produced a breathtakingly beautiful work of art, which I hope will become something that the family feels comfortable with sharing so that people can see, this puts in their own home something that is precious to them. It is precious as an object because it's made by a great artist who was working with them to create something beautiful. This is where we'll have it. This is where art will change. If we all start doing this, if we start commissioning art, if we give artists a reason to put themselves out there, if we make them compete against each other, if we give an artist a reason to engage with scripture and belief and faith and put its best face forward, I mean, this is how it will happen.
It's interesting you say that. We've talked about this on the podcast about creating guilds again in our diocese, right? Based on the medieval notions. So you put people together of similar professional vocation or ministerial interest, and they agree to the spiritual requirements, they pray for each other, and they become leaven for whatever that is, whatever that ministry or avocation or vocation is in the diocese. And the first guild that was created was the Sacred Heart Guild here in our diocese. And that was really for beauty, to unlock the evangelical power of beauty, whether it's in art or music or pilgrimage or whatever. Now, having said all that, one idea that's come up kind of dovetails what you're saying, and that is to gather together Catholic artists and create a place where they could come together to support each other, pray for each other, and be supported by others in their work. And listening to what you just said, if that's really the path forward, the path that's going to yield the most fruit, then there seems to be a greater urgency now in my mind to do that, so that we can have a place where if a person does want to commission a work of art, that they have somewhere to go, where there's a group of individuals who are committed, talented, who would be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There is already something called the Catholic Artist Directory, which is a virtual thing. But I think your point is very important, that while the internet gives us many wonderful things, including the possibility to have a conversation on two sides of the planet right now, but there is also that virtual element, which is, I mean, for artists, when we're asking them to make an incarnational art, we can't ask them to work always in a vacuum. And so the idea of having people, the idea of having, this physical encounter is also very good. There is also, I think, the Catholic Art Institute in Chicago that has an actual contest, and there's also St. Vincent's College in Pennsylvania. There are people who are attempting to create places for artists to get together and to compete. I mean, it's important. I think it's important that artists have to compete in order to kind of bring out the best work. I mean, when we talk about the beginning of the Renaissance, it was when Brunelleschi and Ghiberti went head to head for the Baptistry Door Commission. So it is. I think there needs to be a lot more work on the part of, as we always say, it's the hour of the laity. The laity needs to be doing. I think the laity is in a much better position because nobody wants to hear about the church spending a fortune on art right now.
Right. But on the other hand, as you pointed out, the laity can be the patrons of Catholic art in the 21st century in a way that the church can't at this point. But there would be a need, though. Allow me just to make another observation. When you spoke about St. Peter's, all right, coming into Sainte-Chapelle, but let's particularly when you come into St. Peter's, after all that meandering and all the stuff that goes on through the museums, blah, 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 you're in St. Peter's. And people react. It proves a premise in my mind, and that is space designed in which we pray must be beautiful in order to facilitate the very purpose of its existence, which is to help people to lift their minds and hearts to God.
I could not agree with you more.
If the space is right,
yes,
you would agree.
It is, at the end of the day, the place where we have our contact with the sacraments is inside a church. That is the privileged place to have our direct encounter with God through the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist. Therefore, that space where we have our first understanding, our first that place has to be beautiful. And I'm puzzled by the idea that somehow by making the place look brutalist or gritty or crummy or not as nice as one's house, why on earth that is a good idea to convince people that you are in the presence of your Lord and your Savior. I don't understand it. I don't know why there is this persistent need to uglify churches. It is, in my opinion, disrespectful to the Lord himself. But this is the place that historically, historically, we have always tried to make beautiful, and we've tried to make it beautiful not for elitist, selfish reasons, but because it is the place where everyone can go. So people who do not get to see beauty in their lives, people who do not live in our extremely privileged so-called first world where we have all of our creature comforts, but people who had nothing beautiful, nothing. The one thing that was the most precious to them was their spoon, could go into that place, and that place was theirs. And that idea of losing, that we had a collective beauty that belongs to us because we are all beautiful in the eyes of God and we are made for something beautiful, is a terrible, terrible irresponsibility on the part of the church and all the other people who let that happen. Sorry, I'll get off the soapbox now.
No, well, Liz, if I may, I think you've hit upon something extremely important. I think here in the diocese, for example, I have been pushing in what we call the One, which is this initiative of spiritual and pastoral renewal, right? Help people to grow in their encounter with the Christ personally, form communities that support each other in faith. And one of the pillars, of course, is beauty. In my mind, it's extremely important to make the distinction between the church, for example, sponsoring an artist, right? And people will say, well, why would you do that? And there could be legitimate reasons to say this is the age of the laity to do that. But for the church to ensure that resources are spent so that sacred space is beautiful is the responsibility of the church, and it's not a waste of money. Exactly for all the reasons you just said. And I think more and more parishes are making it a priority to restore their churches and restore them in such a way that there's a coherence, there's an integrity, and I would say all of that rolls up to a beauty where you enter into the space, you don't forget who we are. We do come in as sinners. We come in as the ragtag army of the Lord, but we come into a place that lifts our minds and hearts so that the Lord can teach us in mind, but also in heart, motivate our will. It becomes an incubator of faith, and therefore it has to be beautiful. It has to inspire. It can't be pedestrian, right? So the good news is that more and more parishes, at least in our neck of the woods, are making this a priority.
I think that will be.
So I'm delighted.
I think that's a key part of this renaissance we're trying to bring about. And we are in an age where if you think about how cathedrals were made with people just bringing rocks or their time or the way that people invested in beauty 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, it was important enough for them that when they had nothing, the widow's mite, they were willing to invest anything, something, a part of it. And I think that we could rekindle that desire to be part of making something beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to just ask a question, Liz. So from your perspective, from your expertise, your experience, Perfect. All of your professional background, your love for the church, your own faith, all the rest, what advice would you give me as a bishop to unlock the power of beauty? What would you say? All right, Caggiano, this is what I think you should do. All right, put your emphasis on this or that or the other. What would you? And feel free, let it fly. What would you? The
show is called Let Me Be Frank, so go ahead.
Go right ahead.
So I would say the thing that's been on my mind in between the Eucharistic conference this month and the events that have been happening is that we as Catholics are not very well aware of how much we have contributed to the world of culture and beauty. We don't understand that the Pietà is not an object for a selfie. That it is indeed a Eucharistic work. The reason why the work exists is as a liturgical object that is meant to enhance the experience of consecration at the Eucharist. Same thing with the works of Caravaggio. Same thing with Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper is a work which is profoundly about thinking about the mystery of Jesus, God, and man. And what is disturbing to me is how easily these works can be hijacked by forces that are not interested in our faith and not interested in our message, and we do nothing about it. So I would ask people who I am very grateful to, men like Bishop Barron and men like you, who want to talk about art and culture and make the faithful realize that when you lose ground on that terrain, when you let Michelangelo become a mouthpiece for the forces that hate your faith, when you let Caravaggio become persuader of things that are not what he meant to say, then we are losing even greater ground than you think. So reminding people and retelling them that it is a responsibility to own and to love and to appreciate and to know about this incredibly rich culture that the rest of the world tries to mine for their own devices. That is what I would say is what I would ask a leader to do. I know you've got a lot of other stuff to do, and that art history always shows up very, and Council of Trent's like the last day they talk about art is like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. But just as the lowest cog in the wheel, if I could get a little voice to say, don't give up, don't give in, and don't hand over our great geniuses and the faith that inspired those great geniuses to people who don't care about the faith and indeed want to undermine it.
Liz, well, thank you for that advice. I think it's excellent advice. I would also say this. I think being myself, the person I am, and very cognizant of the fact that we have a patrimony that is living, that's breathing, that is in the service of the proclamation of the kerygma. Our collective responsibility, as you just said, is to make sure that we don't take it for granted, that we don't take it apart, that we don't allow other people to usurp it, right? And that's our common responsibility. For 2,000 years, Christians have given up their lives to give us what we have. And we're not going to have all of that sacrifice go down the drain because we're complacent, we're politically correct, we're comfortable, whatever the blades is, however you want to describe it. I think we have to be shrewd on how we do it. And that is where I think in the end, that could be a podcast in and of itself, is what type of, remember, the father of evil is cunning and arrogant. So we have to be more cunning and humble to undo his work. And not always a frontal attack works, but guerrilla warfare works far better, far more effective. And we'll leave that. Maybe you'll come back and we could talk about guerrilla warfare in the art world. That would be great.
That was very frank of you.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's take our final break. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. His Excellency has been speaking with Liz Lev, an expert on art history and art and beauty and Italy. And we're going to have a listener question, and we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Matt from Restless on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Each week on Restless, we young adults restlessly seek the face of Christ in today's crazy and mixed up world. Join us each Friday at noon on 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, the Veritas app, or wherever you get your shows. Hope to see you there.
Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank with Bishop Frank Caggiano. All right, Excellency, here is this week's listener question. Why does a priest kiss the altar prior to and following Mass?
Well, the simple answer to that question is it's reverencing the relics that are to be enshrined in the altar. And also, if the altar, as it is a symbol of literally the tomb of Jesus Christ, it's reverence to the Lord that we have come to worship and adore, right? In persona Christi. So it's not an empty gesture. It has a very beautiful and very long tradition and history in the life of the church. Mm-hmm. But once again, if I may just put a little editorial comment, we would talk about patrimony. How many Catholics know this? And if they're not taught, how are they going to know this? This is a pious act. But no, it's not a pious act. It has a real meaning in history. So it's all part of the patrimony. It's all part of the patrimony.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. And so if you have a question for Bishop Frank, you can send it in on social media, or you can email questions@veritascatholic.com. Bishop Frank Caggiano is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and so is Veritas Catholic Network. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Foundations in Faith. A grant from the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization makes it possible for us to bring Let Me Be Frank to you. Foundations in Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you can learn more about their outstanding work at foundationsinfaith.org. Liz Lev, what an incredible conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us.
That was great fun. Thank you guys so much for inviting me.
Oh, no, I'm delighted. And you know what? Let me just say this. I think in the age in which we're at, in the work of rebuilding a Catholic culture, you are the right person at the right time to be a leading voice in this. So keep up the great work. And if you ever come back to the United States and you're in Connecticut, let me know.
I will most certainly.
Yeah,
and so, Liz, you have 4 books that folks can purchase, and you also lead tours and pilgrimages in Rome. Where can people find out more from you and get in contact with you?
Oh, you can find me and tours at elizabeth-lev.com.
Awesome.
Perfect. Excellent.
And Excellency, before we go, would you please give us all your blessing?
Yes, I'll be happy to. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord our God, you who are the source of beauty itself, we ask that your Spirit continue to enlighten, guide, and protect us, to help us to be the heralds of salvation in Jesus Christ, in word, in action, in depiction, in art, in all the many ways you reveal your life to us. Continue to bless Liz and her work, and all those who are artists at your disposal to reveal the beauty of your life to us. And we ask that you bless us and our listeners. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Steve.
Have a great rest of your summer.
Thank you. You too.